Hey guys, how's it going? So today I wanted to make a video talking about the Archon team as it stands in Fontaine and kind of who I would take out of it, given that people do still kind of seem to put Furina as the Hydro member of that team. It was interesting to see people's reactions on that. The general consensus seems to be that Nuvalet, as the Hydro Dragon Sovereign at his current peak power, likely does stand on a higher kind of echelon anyways. And I'm actually really excited to see how that ties in with like the upcoming Pyro Archon, the God of War, as well as Capitano, since the statement the strongest individual in Teyvat we first heard before we even knew who pretty much anyone in Fontaine was. And I'm curious to see how those members, as well as some other people like Varka and Skirk, match up. But for now, I just wanted to go over each member of the team and who you would likely take out, what strengths they bring, what you miss out on if they're not there. And starting with Furina, I've been really impressed with her kit. I think she's a really flexible character. She has a ton of ability to serve as just a pure off-field Hydro sub-DPS. And even beyond that, she does still have the healing utility. Very, very powerful kit. I think the main synergy she brings to the team is the ability to proc Hyper Bloom with Nita and Raiden. Super powerful reaction. In general, I felt for some time, since maybe about Sumeru, Genshin more and more has been steering towards reaction-based comps. I do still stubbornly use Raiden Eula, but even I kind of have to admit, there are probably better teams to use Raiden in. I actually also really enjoy using the Raiden Yai Nahida comp. But in general, aside from that, I also want to note, I think it's really powerful just the fact that she can be so much more aggressive with the health drain form when you have such a powerful shielder as Zhongli. I think if you take her out, you obviously just have the Sumeru version of the Archon team, and it still is functional, but I do feel like you are kind of missing out on a little bit too much if you bring her out of that team. Moving down the list to Nahida. One thing that's interesting about Nahida and Venti in particular is that they cannot access the Pyro, and I believe in Venti's case, Cryo part of their ultimate kit until we get the Pyro Archon or the Saritsa. However, I do think the remaining utility is still really good. In general, too, even if you're not using Furina and you're just using the Sumeru Archon team comp version, her E plus Raiden Burst is incredible crowd control. And with the 4 Archon team comp, your general crowd control options are linking enemies together with Nahida E, Venti ult, and Zhongli ult. Or just killing them with like Raiden ult. But, you know. I personally wouldn't take her out of the comp. I just think that the reactions are too powerful. With Raiden, it's a bit of a weird one since almost all of the Archons, or honestly all of the Archons, have been given fairly future-proof supportive style kits in some way. I know that there's big comparisons right now between Furina and Kokomi, and an OG comparison has been Venti versus Kazuha, and while there are strengths and weaknesses on each side of those coins, more than anything, at the moment, I feel like Raiden would almost always be the main DPS in the Archon team comps. I know it's a little bit hard for her to fill that role when her ult is down, but to be honest, that's very characteristic of most main DPS nowadays. For example, Hu Tao, when she's using her E, is cutting through enemies like butter. But when her E is down, if you choose to keep her on field, it's basically the equivalent of you slapping someone with the stick that you found on the playground as a kid to about the same level of result. Although I have seen some pretty cursed Hu Tao physical builds. People do some crazy stuff with this game. But ultimately, I feel like she serves as the main DPS of this team. She serves as the battery. And in general, just Electro plus Dendro, as well as Electro, Dendro, Hydro, Hyper Bloom, again, very, very powerful. With Zhongli, I think ultimately, although I have seen people build like C6 Zhongli with crit geo damage and make the meteor that took out the dinosaurs, most people are probably just building him as the generic HP stacking shielder because it works. I mean, ultimately, you aren't really bringing in 4 reactions unless you're using the current Navia team comp, which I find really cool. I think they did a good job with Navia's kit kind of bringing Geo in some way back into the fold, since Geo reactions have pretty much always been a bit of a odd one out when it comes to Genshin. But the safety Zhongli brings is also just almost never something that you have to even think about, because the Bleed Wolves for Minazuma were something that you had to think about with that, and then they got nerfed into Oblivion. I guess you also have the Shogun boss for weeklies that can one-shot you if you don't have Electro, but that's also so specific that I don't know if it really matters. In general, now that you have someone else in Furina's healing to fill the protection kind of role, I do think Zhongli could be taken out, but I don't know if you would. When I think about the roles each of the Archons fills in a team comp, you know, there is that protective role, there's crowd control, there's main DPS, there's sub DPS, and Zhongli honestly can provide a lot of powerful sub DPS as well. Last but not least, we do have Venti. I'm sure to no one's surprise, I would say in most situations, Venti is unfortunately the one that you would take out of the current version of the Archon team. I have used Venti a decent amount on a friend's account, and I do actually feel like he doesn't match up super poorly compared to Kazuha, even after all this time. I think both are still very powerful. Venti feels a little bit stronger, I think, in terms of pure CC. I mean, his ult sucks in such a massive area, whereas Kazuha feels a little bit more reliant with debuffing. Similar to what I was mentioning earlier, you don't get that Storm Eye elemental absorption with Pyro or Cryo with, you know, out us having access to the Saritsa or Murata, but still very useful. I mean, in all honesty, even with just Raiden in the Sumeru version of the comp, you could just group everyone else together, all of the enemies, and then just blast them with the initial burst from Raiden's ult, and it did so much damage, and it worked really well. I think it's also important to note that Venti does have some of that adventure kind of utility. You could also argue Zhongli Pillar brings this as well, but ultimately the issue with that is that if you're trying to get like an Oculus, right, or maybe get to a chest or something hard to get, you can always just switch characters because you're probably not in combat. If you're actively in combat, that's not an option. But overall, I think that all 5 of the Archons still have fantastic kits. That's just who I would personally take out. I'm curious to hear everyone else's opinion on it. Let me know. But anyways, I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.